Well, welcome back, everybody. This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook, and we're day 3 of the BioCeuticals Research Symposium. I'm speaking here with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, who is... Now, you've done work with the US military, NASA, and you work at the University of South Florida, the which department is that?
Well, it's the Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Physiology, but I also work at the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, which is...
exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, it's kind of... It bridges the gap between science and application of the science. So
is that something that you started, or is that in place and you came along?
The Institute for Human and Machine Cognition was started by Ken Ford. So he was on the Defense Science Board for the president, and also he worked at NASA. He was an executive. So he's a close friend of mine, and he had used the ketogenic diet like years past. But his background is artificial intelligence and DARPA robotics and things like that. But he expanded the Institute from robotics to expanding the physiological the machine and the human, right? So developing physiological things that can enhance resilience.
The exoskeleton stuff.
The exoskeleton stuff, yeah. And things like, yep.
Jason Bourne stuff.
Matt Damon
stuff.
It is. Yep. So you want to be able to build the machine, but also enhance the human's interface with the machine, so the human can work the machine well.
I'm very interested in the sort of military interest, if you like. That you sort of get the picture that the military is very conservative, and then in some cases they'll jump ahead and go, well, we need stuff, so we've got to break out of the mold to get there. Yeah. So where did the interest start with regards to the keto diet and just breaking free of the high carb loading and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, mostly from the special operations community. So there's a lot more leverage as far as funding too for special operations community. And then when it comes to NASA, they are interested in fueling the astronaut. The energy density of the ketogenic diet is about 50% higher, right? Because fats are 9 calories per gram as opposed to carbohydrates and proteins that are 4 calories per gram. So if you take an equal size amount of food in a spaceship, you can get about 50% more energy. So it's like $10,000-$20,000 per pound to get something up in space. So the energy density makes sense, but there's also an interest too because of the protection from galactic cosmic radiation or the neuroprotection. Right. So they have an interest. A lot has to happen before this becomes, the new space food, but to make it an option for astronauts that are already doing low carb or keto, and many are, to make that an option for space and deep space is something that we're working really hard with them.
I love it when you said special operations community. You sort of have this village of a park with swings.
Yeah.
Different swings.
Yeah. Well, there's like the Army Rangers and then the Navy SEALs and then like the PJs, the Air Force and things. Those are different communities.
And I guess that would have particular relevance with the amount of weight that they'd carry on a mission as well. So practical applications with regards to transporting and surviving a mission. So.
That's right. Yep.
So, mechanism of ketones relating to normal EEGs in increased atmospheres. I was really interested when you were talking about that. So, not just space, but also diving.
Yes, for sure.
I understand also that there was some application in recovery from decompression. Is that right?
So if you're decompressing, if you have decompression sickness, one way to reverse decompression sickness is with high pressure oxygen. So if you can expose someone to higher pressure oxygen, if they're in ketosis, you could more therapeutically bring them out of decompression sickness. So that's the idea there. Yep. But with high pressure oxygen, like a Navy SEAL diving down or using hyperbaric oxygen therapy, oxygen's a stimulant to the brain. And as we go higher and higher or deeper and deeper, you're producing more and more oxygen-free radicals. And if the brain is running on glucose, the metabolism starts to break down. And then that can trigger hyperexcitability and a seizure. In the context of the ketogenic diet, the ketones keep the brain running so efficiently, it makes the brain resilient in the background of that oxidative stress. So even though it's extreme oxidative stress, the brain can continue to function and produce energy and stabilize the brain to normal activity under conditions it would otherwise break down.
Is there control of like NMDA or AMDA receptor activity there with calcium influx, magnesium stabilization, that sort of thing?
That's right, yeah. So we know there's excess glutamate that's contributing to oxygen toxicity seizures, and blocking the NMDA receptor, the N-methyl-D-aspartate, or the AMPA receptors can stop the seizure. You could do that pharmacologically, and that's what we did. But those drugs cause a lot of problems, right? So you're blocking synaptic transmission. You're blocking the way the brain normally communicates. So the idea is that with the ketogenic diet or even a ketone supplementation, you are literally converting more of that excitatory amino acid, glutamate, to GABA. So the GABA to glutamate ratio goes up considerably. And I've actually measured my neurotransmitters like in the habitat, and I have like 4 times the amount of GABA relative to what's normal. So we did a lot of work in animal models, and it was kind of interesting to reproduce it in some of the human work too. So you are legitimately, converting a potentially excitatory, hyper-excitatory, excitotoxic neurotransmitter into one that has a brain stabilizing effect. So this is some of the new information that's coming out.
I'm going to jump ahead to a question that I had later on cancer, and work with Volta Longo looking at ketogenesis during cancer therapy. It was interesting what you said there about converting glutamate or glutamine to GABA, and there was some reasonably recent research pointing to glutamine in cancer cells as being a growth stimulant.
Glutamine, yeah, for sure.
The assumption was that therefore oral glutamine was bad because it was feeding that cancer there, which doesn't always associate. But this is very interesting about the conversion to GABA rather than using it as giving them a fuel, if you like.
Yeah. So you'd be shuttling more. So there's a glutamate, glutamine interrelationship, right? So they can interconvert to one another. So if you're diverting more glutamate to GABA, then you can lower the potential intracellular amounts of glutamine. And glutamine, through glutaminolysis, can be used by cancer cells for fuel, but glutamine also becomes an anabolic amino acid to synthesize de novo synthesis of fatty acids that contribute to the expanding biomass of the tumor. So the tumor needs energy to make, lots of ATP to meet the energetic demands. It also needs precursors to basically add more fats to the membrane as more cells are forming. And about 40% of glutamine is being, shuttled into fatty acid synthesis to make membranes. So a lot of that glutamine is actually being converted. So we know that the ketogenic diet, especially when it's calorie restricted, can lower the levels of glutamine. There's also drugs like sodium phenylbutyrate or bufenil, that if you take bufenil, it binds up glutamine and you eliminate it out your urine. So it conjugates it in a way so it can bring it down. It conjugates it in the bloodstream. Right. So sodium phenylbutyrate, it's similar to a ketone, and it conjugates the glutamine to a molecule that can be eliminated. So you can bring your glutamine down fairly low. But glutamine's also important for your immune system, and it's also important for your gut. So if you drink glutamine and you've gone through chemotherapy, that can help repair your gut. When you drink glutamine, very little actually gets into your circulation, because your gut cells use that for fuel. Your colonocytes can use it for fuel. So you actually absorb very little. If you kind of have to give it intravenous, like burn patients, you can give it intravenous stuff. So to say that glutamine fuels cancer cells, don't give the cancer patient glutamine, that's not completely correct, because in some cases it can be very therapeutic. So that needs to be taken into account.
I've been told by a nurse who attended a recent neurology conference that when the ketogenic diet was discussed for use in epilepsy, and she was talking to the neurologists later on, they said, nice concept, too hard, couldn't be bothered. What's your message to these doctors?
Well, you have to select the patient. The patient and the caretaker, the family, have to be highly motivated. So the family has to be on board for that. That's really, even all the clinicians that work in the diet, they don't even attempt it with a family who, will not embrace this approach. So that's the first thing. But I'm really excited about the food companies that are coming out. Like, I'm testing a ketogenic chocolate bar. I'm testing a ketogenic brownie. I'm testing ketogenic
tequila.
Pizza.
Please, tequila.
No,
please,
actually,
please.
Well, there's a company out there, I don't know if Tri-Farm Wines, that actually select about 3 or 4 dozen types of wines that have sugar content under 2 grams. So you can drink them, and I did. I drank all the wines. And then I tested my ketones, and I could stay in ketosis drinking up to 2 glasses of wine a day.
Do you need any extra test subjects to come along with you on a night out, maybe?
Yeah, well, I keep it perhaps under my desk in the lab. It is kind of a myth that people think you have to completely avoid alcohol on a ketogenic diet, and that's not the case, because you can stay in ketosis with a dry martini, or dry wines. You can actually...
I must be so in ketosis.
Yeah, but it's a dose thing too. So once you get above 2 glasses, then you start to lower your ketones. But for most people, they can have, especially 1 glass a day, I think is fine.
I'm going to cut my last question, because I'm sure there's some much better intelligent questions from the audience. You had your hand up first. Can we wait for the microphone, please?
I just have a question on the conversion to GABA, because some of the children with autism actually get hyper when you feed them more glutamine, and some people even stay away from any supplement with glutamine because in the brain it causes more hyperactivity, which probably depends on the lack of cofactors for the conversion of glutamine to GABA. But have you had any comments on that? Because you work with normal people, well, normal as in healthy people, so to speak, who haven't got the autism.
Well, actually, most of our work is probably in disease population. Angelman syndrome, which is characterized by higher glutamate to GABA. So, and one of the drugs that's it's used very frequently is vigabatrin. So vigabatrin actually works through enhancing GABAergic activity. So the ketogenic diet does elevate glutamate because it makes more alpha ketoglutarate, and that's your precursor, but it quickly shuttles more of the glutamate to GABA by stimulating the activity of glutamic acid decarboxylase. So we can do an assay, and it shows a greater amount of that enzyme and a greater activity of that enzyme. So by changing the neuropharmacology of the brain with the ketogenic diet, you are shuttling more of an excitatory. You need to make the excitatory amino acid to make the inhibitory, but more of it's getting converted over, if that helps.
Without adding the extra cofactors, or is that in your ketogenic?
Magnesium, things like that.
The magnesium. So I'm a big fan of magnesium, and I think it should be included. It was one of the supplements.
Which form?
So magnesium glycinate's pretty good. Magnesium citrate, magnesium chloride was the first one I used because my magnesium levels, it was one of the first things that came out of range. It was normal. So I started supplementing with magnesium chloride, and that got me back into normal range. But now I use a combination of magnesium citrate and malate, I think, and it comes in a 50-50. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This one over here.
You mentioned during your main presentation you touched on intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering about the crossover between ketogenic diet as an ongoing diet versus the benefits of fasting or time-restricted eating. And do you see the same benefits from both, or even, I guess you can combine the two together, but do you have to?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are some people who just cannot follow the ketogenic diet, and I know some people that they even have epilepsy. And if they do, they could get off the ketogenic diet, but do intermittent fasting, say, for example, eat within a 4-hour window from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., and they can manage their epilepsy eating low carb, 70 to 100 grams a day, just fibrous vegetables and things like that. This has not been studied. It's anecdotally, we've seen, but we know that if your body is fat adapted and adapted to the ketogenic diet and you do intermittent fasting, it's much, much easier. because your body's already adapted to using ketones for fuel. I think the combination, I think doing ketogenic intermittent fasting could give you all the benefits. If you're using, especially for a medical therapy, I think that could work. And even even the mainstream neurologists who are advocating this are even getting their patients to start doing intermittent fasting. Like, this was not even a term, back 5-6 years ago even. And now the clinical community sees that there are a lot of benefits to doing intermittent fasting. So I think the two together could be optional or optimal, and you could do one or the other, but when combined together, I think it works really good when combined together. Some people ask, well, can I eat fat or even take ketone supplements during the day? My feeling is that as long as you're keeping your glucose down and your ketones up and kind of staying in that metabolic zone, whatever strategy you use during that fasting period, I would call it a modified intermittent fasting, as long as you're keeping in that therapeutic range, and if you're getting calories, that could work. Yeah.
Before the mic goes to them, I'm going to ask another quick question. You're talking about not everybody can stick to the diet. Do you pick personality types, like, for instance, disciplined athletes versus people with the discipline of a mushroom?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I thought
well,
so.
You need to do things like track your macros. So one of the first patients that contacted me was from the UK. His name was Mike Dancer. So and now he's the poster child for Matthew's Friends. Matthew's Friends is the European equivalent of the Charlie Foundation here. So Mike was really into fitness, so he already tracked everything. He already tracked all his macronutrients. So when he learned about the diet, he was already on about a half dozen anticonvulsant drugs, and it was going to go in to have part of his hippocampus removed because it was a formula. Yeah. So before he did that, I had connected with him and said, Mike, look at these papers, connect with these people, you might want to try this. So he did it, and it worked remarkably well. He cold turkey went off all of his medication. I included him in my TED Talk even. And it was so easy for him because he was already doing it. So he was already tracking his macros as an athlete, as like a fitness guy. He was already doing that. So he just, shifted his macronutrients and did the same tracking. And he does the modified form of the ketogenic diet. And it was very easy for him. It can be, for the typical parents that want to put their kid on it, it can be very overwhelming. But there's so many tools out there, and now there's foods emerging on the market where the child does not feel ostracized, or the adult does not feel, ostracized, that they can actually eat a lot of these comfort foods and stick with the diet.
And be inclusive rather than exclusive. Yeah.
Yep.
There's one last question over here.
Yep. Hi.
Yep.
In our practice, we see day to day a lot of subclinical hypothyroid patients. And of course, they're often the ones that are overweight and fatigued. And so, of course, a diet like this would seemingly seem appropriate. But subclinical insulin resistance, I think, is a big problem. So is the advice still to do the lifestyle medicine to support adrenal fatigue and address the subclinical hypothyroidism first before you can get them on, or have you got some hot tips to get them on faster?
Well, I would correct their hormones, and find out so there's a couple things that can really impact thyroid. Calorie restriction, over-exercise. These are like classical things that I see over and over again. And sleep too. So a lack of sleep, like if those three things are optimized and their thyroid's still low, then you might want to start supplementing. But I think intermittent fasting can kind of quickly correct a lot of these metabolic dysregulation and get the gut microbiome healthy again. I think intermittent fasting can help with that. Get them on a good probiotic. So fix a couple like the obvious things. A lot of people over-exercise and it pushes their thyroid down. I've seen it in myself. My thyroid has always been normal, but when I did like crazy 1 week of fasting and then I was like, well, my T3 was low. So T4 to T3 conversion goes down. Your body's very sensitive to that. So correct some of those things first, and then Yeah, but carbohydrate restriction doesn't have to be ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting. These things are very powerful for resetting insulin resistance or resetting insulin sensitivity.
And with that, we have to end. Could I please ask everybody to give Dr. Dominic D'Agostino a rousing applause. You can find all the videos from the FX Medicine Live stage at the 6th BioCeuticals Research Symposium in Melbourne by going to the FX Medicine website and clicking on Industry Insights under the Community tab.